This is Special Prosecutor Larry Klayman.
I'm the only lawyer ever to obtain a court ruling that a president of the United States committed a crime.
For truth. For competition.
As a young lawyer, I helped break up AT&T. That's why you have all your cell phones today.
For sovereignty. For the Republic.
I'm the guy who at Judicial Watch, which I founded, uncovered the Chinagate scandal. Millions of dollars going to the Clinton campaign, corrupting our political system.
For the privacy of citizens.
And I'm the only guy to have enjoined the National Security Agency from mass surveillance on hundreds of millions of Americans.
Tearing it up.
I'm the son of meatpackers in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I know how to slice and dice.
Bringing it back.
We're going to take this country apart and put it back together again in the way envisioned by our founding fathers.
It's not just talk.
We're not just regurgitating news stories. Larry Klayman, special prosecutor, is making the news.
And now, here's Larry.
Welcome to this week's edition of Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman. A very important and special show. I have with me today the great Alan Keyes, former presidential candidate on a number of occasions, UN ambassador, Senate candidate against Barack Obama, but more important than all, a very learned person and a very bright person who's my close friend. I want to start this off by saying that we haven't heard anything, either in the media or out of the administration, about bringing the communist Chinese government to justice. Obviously, the president's concerned that we're so dependent on China with regard to pharmaceutical products and other products, he's not trying to rock the boat. However, he's gone beyond that and actually praised the president of China as his close friend, confidant, and that the man of integrity. Well, I hope the president's just being diplomatic, because the president of China is not a man of integrity. In fact, he runs the most vicious major regime in the world today, the communist Chinese government, along with its Politburo, who killed tens of thousands of people in the early 1990s, continues to enslave his people. And as we have alleged in a number of lawsuits that we brought, because we came forward when our own Justice Department failed to act, we are seeking damages for what was done with this COVID-19 virus, because there's a lot of evidence out there that this is manufactured. It's a man-made virus. Perhaps they took it from a bat, but a research institute in Wuhan, China, believed to be the only bioweapons lab of the Chinese. And even if it isn't, it's still a lab. It's no doubt that it's there. There's a lot of evidence. In fact, there's a documentary out on Epic Times right now which details that, which is up on our website at freedomwatchusa.org. It would appear that this virus was manufactured for warfare, for use as a biological agent. Now, all countries have this. It's illegal. You're not allowed to have it under the Geneva Conventions or other international treaties. You remember back in 9/11 when anthrax got out, it was manufactured in a lab in Virginia, and George Bush, the dad, with Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney, gave it over to Saddam Hussein. Somehow it got out. Well, the same thing has happened with the Chinese. But the Chinese, once it got out, did not inform anyone other than their own hierarchy, giving rise to this pandemic. And the big question is, why did they do that? Well, they did it obviously because it benefits them. They're taking the world down. They are asserting themselves as the power, as the West burns, as we are headed to a recession potentially, and maybe even a depression. China's sitting there literally laughing. And they have said that they've arrested the virus. How did they do that? Did they have a vaccine? Do they know how it was engineered? None of this has been given to the United States in terms of how we can combat this scourge. But the bottom line is this, is that it was Freedom Watch and Larry Klayman, if I may say so, who brought lawsuits, one in Dallas, Texas, class action lawsuits. We already have nearly 800 plaintiffs for this huge damage in the trillions of dollars. Why should the American people have to pay for the damage? Why do we have to bankrupt our country for generations to come with our kids and grandkids likely living in abject poverty? The Chinese should have to pay. And why is it that our Justice Department has not joined us in that suit or even taken the lead? When the Attorney General was interviewed this week by Laura Ingraham on Fox News, she asked him, what are you going to do about it? And he says, well, we're fighting intellectual property theft. I mean, that's not an answer. In addition to that, we brought a case at the International Criminal Court in The Hague, Holland. Now, the United States is not a member of that criminal court, neither is China, but it has worldwide jurisdiction. We have expressed our concern in the past. We have not signed on as a member of that court because of its very strong jurisdiction. But at this point, we have to use whatever means we have to bring about justice. And the International Criminal Court, after that complaint was filed, you can see it at freedomwatchusa.org. You can also sign up for our class action there and support us with tax-deductible contributions, because this is getting expensive, and it will be expensive. They said in 48 hours, we have opened the processing of this case. And you can see the letter up on our website as well. And there's another issue I want to discuss with Alan, and that is our deep state, our intelligence deep state, the CIA, the NSA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and the FBI. Where are they? Why didn't they give timely notice to President Trump of what was going on in China? Obviously, they have the surveillance capabilities, not just with satellites, not just with intercepting internet communications. They've spied on hundreds of millions of Americans in the past without probable cause. I got 2 court judgments against them claiming that that was unconstitutional, ruling that that was unconstitutional. But yet they couldn't tip the president of the United States off as to what was going on in China. We know that they tried to remove him with the Russian collusion investigation, the Iranian collusion investigation, with impeachment, with illegal warrants at the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, with illegal wiretapping on him, his family, his colleagues. They are hostile to him. This is the deep state. We're going to discuss that with Alan as well, run by loyalists to Clinton and Obama through the minions that were left behind by former CIA Director John Brennan and Director of National Intelligence James Clapper. And then we have a lawsuit which I filed for the actor, comedian, writer, and Yale lawyer Ben Stein against the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, for a declaratory judgment. He was the first to come out with an edict that if you didn't stay at home, you'd be locked up and thrown in jail. And in fact, other people have been thrown in jail in California, and other state governors then followed suit. Even religious services have been curtailed for less than 10 people in the state of California and elsewhere. If you combine everything, the effects of this virus, the $1 trillion bailout, which puts this country on the dole, which socializes this country, and it will never return, most likely, to where it was in terms of a capitalist free society. Once people get dependent on it, it remains like Obamacare. If you couple that with these draconian tyrannical orders, what do you have? You have a Soviet-style gulag. You have a socialist/communist state. And the left is eating this up. The left, whose heroes are Mao Zedong, Karl Marx, Leon Trotsky, and others, are using this as an opportunity to transform this country into a socialist state where government controls and God is frozen out of our body politic and our lives. That being said, I want to turn this over to Alan. He's the most articulate person I know on this planet. He should have been president of the United States. If he was president of the United States, we wouldn't be having a lot of these difficulties today. And he's also my good friend, and I deeply respect what he has to say on this subject. And the first thing that we want to discuss is, why isn't our own government taking action against China? Why are they getting down on their knees to China and begging for forgiveness?
Well, I have no idea. I have noted that Secretary Pompeo was at one time saying, I think, true things, and had people around him saying true things about the responsibility of the Russians for this whole episode. Not the Russians, the Chinese, for this whole episode. But I think that you pointed out that a lot of the understanding about what happened, leave aside the question for a moment, of which I think is worth discussing, and I've read many things that suggest that this looks like a weaponized virus, right? A virus created in a laboratory for purposes of experimentation. Whatever the purpose of creating it, it's quite obvious that once it got out in Wuhan, the Chinese government first took great pains not to deal with the virus as a threat, but to suppress any information that might let the rest of the world know what was going on. And I can't understand how the U.S. government can simply ignore that in the way they're dealing with the Chinese. When you consider the impact that it's had on nations and people, individuals throughout the world, and, of course, the economic results that it has imposed on many countries in Europe and the United States because of the quarantine and the efforts being made to suppress its spread, that has not only cost nations, including our own, enormously in terms of money. It constitutes a direct and sadly effective attack against the human beings who are subject to infection with this virus. And the Chinese, for a period of about almost 2 months, actually knew the danger that it posed and not only didn't share information needed to help others prepare against it, but they actually, by all reports and verified reports that I've seen in all different places, they suppressed it, they destroyed the evidence that was associated with the initial identification of the virus, and they finally allowed travel to continue throughout the world because they ignored the fact that letting their population and people from the infected areas go to different parts of the world posed a direct threat, not just to this country or that country, but to the whole of humanity. I think it's right to call it a crime against humanity. We need to be asking what is going to be done about it.
Alan, do you think the Chinese did this intentionally or at least allowing it to spread, that they realize they're going to benefit from this if they destroy Western economies and economies in South America? We're going to be back with our second segment with Alan Keyes in just 1 second, and we'll answer that question.
Dangerous.
Don't care. Use the court and the law.
Lethal.
This is bad.
Special prosecutor.
Very bad.
Larry Klayman.
If you'd like to support Freedom Watch and this radio show, go to freedomwatchusa.org.
I'm back with Dr. Alan Keyes, my friend, colleague, scholar. Alan, what do you think was the Chinese motivation in allowing this virus to spread?
Well, I think that you have to sort of ask cui bono in terms of what otherwise appears to be an irrational, not to mention under various and assorted treaty arrangements, an internationally unlawful willingness to suppress the information, to go so far as to disappear or even kill scientists who wanted to and were sharing with their colleagues throughout the world, tried to share anyway, information about it. What else could you posit but that they thought they were either avoiding some damage, the Communist Party leaders, to themselves, or else they were going to benefit enormously from the damage being inflicted on others. And so those are the only two choices you have. Either way, it's gross negligence, or it is for the sake of some gain of their own, an attack against the rest of the human race. And the fact that you have people, whether it's the WHO or others, who are willing to go along with Chinese propaganda that for quite some time now has been directed by their military. In other words, it's been spread through the apparatus of their military. That then raises the question as to whether or not they had launched an attack in the first place, in this stealthy way, because that's one of the characteristics of the virus, in order that they could take military advantage of it. And that was understood in the context of their military purposes, which is why now the propaganda they're spreading throughout the world is being handled by their military. This, I think, all points in the direction of a conscious and premeditated effort to set the rest of the world up for the kind of supremacy that they have boldly been talking about. And in some responses to what the United States has said about their culpability, they have actually threatened us, saying things that in their outlets of the Communist Party that suggest that if we don't cooperate with them, if we don't stop calling it the Chinese virus, if we don't kowtow to their will, we will suffer even greater damage. So if they weren't responsible for it in the first place, why would they be threatening it in the future?
How do you explain the non-response of our government in terms of holding China accountable? I mean, it's not enough to say, and I love the president, but it's not enough to say I'm a friend of President Xi, and he's a man of integrity. I mean, and then Tom Cotton, Senator Cotton, who I generally like, he says, oh, well, we'll just stop doing business with China. I mean, is that enough, Alan?
I doubt that it's going to be. No, because we are right now under the gun to deal with this in a way that is already costing not just our people right now, but our future, right? And laying enormous burdens on a situation that a lot of us felt was already dangerous in terms of our national debt and our inability to move forward toward the future without accumulating more of it. We're also altering the pattern of our lives in a way that directly contradicts the terms of the Constitution of the United States. Now, in times of emergency, you might curtail movement, you might curtail, ask people to shelter in place and things like that. But if you get into a situation where a routine of attacks, right, because this may be just the first instance of a new form of self-warfare directly aimed at our population, so that it makes basically the people themselves the front line of battle. That has to be dealt with in a way that is thoughtfully and carefully laid out so that we are weighing the sovereignty of our people against what is needed to deal with the threat in such a way as to preserve us as a nation. Because if we abandon the premises of our Constitution, if we abandon the understanding of God-endowed rights and the government's responsibility to constrain itself out of respect for them, then we have destroyed our country, not saved it. And I think that is obviously not the purpose for the existence of our government. And the people of this country need to demand that our leaders start taking account of the truth, and that they also do so in a way that counts on the courage of the American people rather than asking us to surrender to our fears.
Very well said. We're going to be back with the next segment of Special Prosecutor Larry Klayman. We're going to talk about government power. We're going to talk about federal judges. We're going to talk about where this country's headed. Will it ever return to where it was before COVID-19? We'll be right back.
And now, 4 words that make corrupt politicians make wee-wee in their little pants.
Transparency and the rule of law will be the touchstones of this presidency.
But we have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
Special Prosecutor Larry Klayman.
Be the one who makes our country great again. Go to freedomwatchusa.org and donate.
Back with Alan Keyes. Alan, do you think this country will ever return to what we knew it to be, for better or worse, before this pandemic occurred with COVID-19?
If by that you mean, will we ever be in a situation where we are once again strong, reasonably healthy, and in control of our destiny as a people, I think that's quite possible. I don't discount that at all. Won't do so, however, if we give in to people who are consciously trying to engineer changes that scrap the Constitution, that have us talking, some people talking glibly about a post-constitutional era and all of this. If we embrace that as somehow necessary to deal with something that threatens us with death up to a certain degree, then we're basically saying that we have been attacked and defeated, and we will now surrender our Constitution, our understanding of right and wrong, our reverence for God, simply in order to survive at the mercy of those who have inflicted this upon us. That would be insane. Did we ever do that in the course of dealing with any warlike threat against our people? Of course not. But when you say return to the way we were, I'm not sure we weren't being led down a path in any case that was surrendering the character in terms of our sense of understanding, our sense of responsibility for one another and for the common good of our country, and our sense of respect for the real meaning of the word right, which is not to do what we please, but to do what is in accordance with right as determined by the standard of the Creator God who made us. That's the import of the Declaration, and that was the bedrock set of principles that the Constitution was framed on. So I hope we will return, not to be subject again to the Eric Holders of the world berating us because we have become a nation of cowards, as he said. No, we're not cowards. And I hope that this whole thing will lead us to rediscover that we are courageous people.
Let's break it down economically. Yeah, what about the fact that now virtually everyone in this country is on the government dole, on the government take?
Well, I don't think, Larry, I have to take exception to that. I don't think that's true. I think that two things were true as imperatives. Number one, we didn't want the smoke to clear and see all the small businesses in our country destroyed, because that is the backbone of what is left of our middle class. And we didn't want the smoke to clear and don't want it to clear and see us entirely dependent on an economy that is organized around a technological sector that has already proven its proneness to abuse. And if we regard what is being done as measures intended to preserve us against that possibility, then we don't end up in a situation where what we are doing to make sure that we have jobs to return to and enterprises that are still functioning. I don't think that's necessarily surrendering to a socialist regime. If we take the mentality, however, that this isn't an emergency that we're dealing with, but a permanent situation, then of course we will have surrendered to socialism. And the Democrats are now pushing to make sure that we do so by implementing permanent dependencies that are no part of meeting the emergency. And in that event, we will surrender. But don't we have the judgment to distinguish between those things and go to the polls in November and elect people who, while respecting the fact that we want to preserve life insofar as possible, also respect the fact that many lives have been given in defense of our liberty, and that if we are on the front lines now as a people, we will have the same courage our soldiers had to have on any other battlefield.
Well, that's nice to hear. Are you encouraged that we'll ever go back to the point where people won't be as dependent on government largesse, government handouts?
One of the things we're having to rediscover in the terms of this, exemplified by a battle that I think is ongoing. The folks at Harvard, I was just reading, were going to have a conference that was basically hostile to homeschooling, for example. But I have been on with folks who are part of the homeschool movement, and they are waking up to the fact that right now, the kids being at home, that's something that has challenged all parents again to remember their role in the education of their children. If we learn the lessons of our own courage, of our own responsibility, out of these days that we are spending, rediscovering that, yes, in fact, we can survive on our own. And we can especially survive on our own in terms of understanding and meeting the responsibilities that we have toward each other, and especially toward our children, toward our families, and toward their survival, not just physically and materially, but in terms of the judgments, the moral understanding, the thirst for knowledge, and the understanding of the necessity of clarifying once again our dedication to our basic principles of truth. All these things are going on. And I think insofar as they are, and people rediscover the fact that we're not surviving this because of what the government is doing. We're surviving it because of what we are willing to do in order to answer the emergency and accept responsibility for ourselves and our families. And when we go back to work with a sense of having rediscovered that, I think we'll not be losing ourselves as a people, but rediscovering the courage and the sense of self-reliance. That was
and that's exactly what
Americans in every generation.
That's exactly what I'm trying to convey, and that's why I'm very privileged to have you on the show today, because we, the American people, need to rise up ourselves. We cannot depend on the politicians. We cannot depend on our so-called Justice Department, of which I was once a proud alumnus. We have to do it for ourselves, and that's why Freedom Watch and our supporters and our plaintiffs that have now entered into this class action in Dallas, Texas, are taking action themselves, because our government is not doing it. Our politicians are paying lip service to holding China accountable. This is not about the Chinese people. They're good people. Over 30% of the people that have signed up for our case as plaintiffs are Chinese Americans or Asian Americans. They're as upset as the rest of us are, and it should not be taken out on them. This is an evil communist regime in China, and our attorney general sits there in front of Laura Ingraham and says he's worried about intellectual property right now. Well, you know, it's important. But right now, it's not about Hillary Clinton. It's not about fusion GPS. It's not about witch hunts. It's not about what happened in the past. It's about what's happening now. And that's why we took action. And the rest of the world sees this, Alan. I'm getting texts, emails, and calls from all over the world. We filed a case also in Israel. I'm a plaintiff there along with Freedom Watch. We have a fine Israeli law firm. We filed it in Jerusalem a few days ago. It'll move very quickly. Same thing. Israel's being destroyed because of this, and they could go very quickly because they're a very small country. I get calls and emails and texts from India, from Sri Lanka, from Spain, from Poland, from Turkey, from Argentina. There's a positive side of this. The world is uniting, and individual citizens and groups throughout the world are realizing that their governments are not holding the Chinese accountable, and their pockets are being emptied out with no accountability. And, you know, we filed this in federal court in Dallas, and, of course, we also have a Freedom of Information Act case to find out what the intelligence agencies, the deep state, knew and when they knew it, and why they did not sufficiently advise President Trump and the American people. But it's going to rest on our federal judges to make the decision on whether this case goes forward. And I got to tell you, in the past, these federal judges have been, by and large, a bunch of political hacks. Now, I think in this case, perhaps they'll see that their own future and the lives of their children and grandchildren and themselves are at stake, and will let these cases proceed. But I want to get your thoughts on federal judges, the power of the judiciary, not just with regard to constitutional questions, but simply doing the right thing with the nuts and bolts of lawsuits to allow cases to proceed without regard to political bias or prejudice against people. And I've been seeing that over and over and over again with these federal judges who have lifetime tenure, are generally appointed because of the political contributions they or their law firms or labor unions or corporations made on their behalf. And by and large, these federal judges are a bunch of hacks. And it's dangerous in this situation when our own government is not holding China accountable, and the ability to do it rests in the hands of a federal judge, allowing it to go to a jury, which is what our founders wanted to happen, to take the power away from the king's yes men on the bench of the Court of St. James and let the people decide legal cases.
Well, I think part of the problem fundamentally is that this is supposed to be a government, as Lincoln called it, of, by, and for the people, operating through institutions responsible to the people and held to that responsibility by periodic elections, right? That included, though everybody forgets it, the judges. And throughout the country's history, those judges have, while being given a certain independence so that they would not be driven by any motive except to respect the laws that were supposed to be made by representatives of the people in the legislature, but you also gave to legislatures in the states and at the national level the power of policing their use or abuse of that judicial power, so that if they departed from the understanding, moral as well as legal, of the people that had basically put them in office through their representatives and shaped the laws that they're supposed to apply, including, by the way, their ratification of the Constitution, then they were supposed to be removed from the bench and not allowed, in fact, to continue that abuse. I think we've neglected the power of impeaching and removing judges. We've neglected the power of impeaching and removing elements of the permanent bureaucracy. All civil officers of the United States government are subject to impeachment and removal. by a simple majority vote in both houses. The lie about how you need 2/3 to get rid of anybody is crazy and nowhere justified in the text of the Constitution itself. So by simple majority vote, and that requires going to the polls and electing in both houses of Congress or in the legislature as a whole the majority needed to take the step of calling them to account for their abuse of the power of government, because they are not. The courts are not the ultimate arbiters of the law in the United States. The people are. And that is why our system is called not just a democratic system based on the power of the people, but rather a system of election and representation based on the judgment of the people, right? And that judgment expressed in the voting booth then has the power to clean house. And I think when they elected Donald Trump, this is why they elected him, because he came forward offering to be somebody who would do just that, drain the swamp, clean house, and represent again both the moral sense as well as the responsible sovereignty of the people of this country at the grassroots. That's what all governors and all legislators are supposed to represent, but they can't do it if we don't have the courage to insist that they do, and that courage requires that we remember that we cannot rely on government for our livelihood if we need to preserve our lives in freedom and in liberty. And that's what we've been tempted to do. All these socialist temptations, all these semi-socialist, quasi-socialist programs. I think what needs to happen is a rebirth of our understanding of liberty in this country. It is not the right to do licentiously whatever we please, so that if we're given permission to destroy our nature, that's okay, and to kill our children, that's okay. No, we're not going to take as an aspect of our slavery the opportunity freely to kill one another, which is all they're offering. I think what we need to do is take back under control what we are now displaying, our capacity for self-discipline translated into self-government, which means abiding by the understanding of right that we claim is the real source of our authority as a people. For rights are not about doing what you please. They're about doing what you have the right to do because it is authorized and required by the understanding and standard of right of Almighty God. That's in the Declaration, and if we return to that character, I think we have hope of preserving our nation.
Well, that's right, Alan. We're running out of time on this segment. I want to thank you for joining us, and I agree with you completely. In fact, it was Adams who said, it doesn't matter how many times you change your government or forms of leaders, without religion, ethics, and morality, there will not be a lasting liberty, and that's what you're saying. Thank you for everything you've done for this country. We'll be in touch. I look forward to you as a mentor and a great thinker of where we need to go in this country. God bless you.
Before he was a trial lawyer, he sliced him and diced him.
People used to ask me, Larry, what caused you to start Judicial Watch and now Freedom Watch, given the powerful forces in this country that put you at risk?
In a meat packing plant.
I'm the son of meat packers in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I know how to slice and dice.
A very special prosecutor, Larry Klayman.
If you'd like to support Freedom Watch and this radio show, go to freedomwatchusa.org.
You just heard Dr. Alan Keyes, a very wise man. He believes in the future of this country. He believes in the goodness of Americans. He believes that we will right our sinking ship. But to be able to right that ship, we need judges who will enforce the law, will do so without political or other biases and prejudices. And here is what Thomas Jefferson said. I'm writing a new book. It takes a revolution. Because without judges that will enforce the law, that's where we are in, and that's where we will be headed in the future, particularly in times of crisis such as we face today. And here's a quote from Jefferson, because he saw the dangers of the federal judiciary becoming too powerful in an insidious and heinous way. And I quote, "You seem to consider the judges as the ultimate arbiters of all constitutional questions, a very dangerous doctrine indeed, and one which would place us under the despotism of an oligarchy. Our judges are as honest as other men and not more so, meaning they're not terribly honest. They have with others the same passions for party, for power, and the privilege of their core. Their power is the more dangerous as they are in office for life and not responsible as the other functionaries are to the elective control. And that is why we are now challenging the judges in our lawsuits against this vicious and evil Chinese communist regime to bring about justice when our government has failed us. The power to allow these cases to go forward rests in the judiciary. The cases should go before a jury of our peers. That jury should make a decision as to whether China will be held accountable, both civilly and criminally, at the International Criminal Court, which will be decided by judges. And we need justice here because we need to reestablish the rule of law in this country and around the world, because the Chinese are a lawless regime. The communist Chinese, that is, not the Chinese people who have been enslaved by them. So I ask you for your support. Go to freedomwatchusa.org. We need to fight peacefully and legally. Join our class action in Dallas, Texas. Support our criminal case at The Hague. Give us the resources to amass a team of lawyers in this country to try this case before a jury and to collect with Chinese assets that are already in this country, which the president should freeze immediately so we can collect. The American people do not need to pay for the damage. It will bankrupt our children and grandchildren. It already is bankrupting them. They'll live in abject poverty. And if the American people, if our passion and our spirit is to rise again after this crisis, then we need to have clear sailing ahead of us. And we need to remove the dangers of a communist Chinese regime, just like we need to remove the dangers of a Cuban communist regime or a Venezuelan communist regime, or what is in Russia today still in effect, a communist regime who want to destroy us. And of course, then we have radical Islam in Iran with their acquisition of nuclear weapons and arms. So that's why it's important to put our foot down now. If we don't hold the Chinese accountable, if we don't bring about justice, that will send a very dangerous signal to other adversaries that they can seek to destroy our country and the Western world. And that is exactly what the communist Chinese are seeking to do now, whether this virus got out accidentally or by design, whether it's a bioweapon or whether it's simply a manufactured virus from a virus that was in bats. We need to take a stand right now because the Chinese see the utility of this. Our economy is being destroyed. They have stabilized, according to their own propaganda, what's happening in their country as the rest of the world is on fire and going down the drain. So go to freedomwatchusa.org. Get up off the couch. Turn off Fox News. Fox News puts nothing on with regard to our lawsuits or our cases. They are petty. They are biased. Anything that Larry Klayman or his clients do, they don't report, because I've had my differences with them for over 20 years. But differences or not, the American people need to know what's going on. They need to know that they have the power in their own hands. And Fox would rather just rake in the money and go to the bank and spend it. And their hosts are smiling. They're happier than punch because they know they'll get raises next year as the rest of the country goes down the drain economically. So go to freedomwatchusa.org. Sign up for our class actions. Support our cause. Do what needs to be done. Get off the couch, put the popcorn, Diet Coke, and beer down, and join Freedom Watch in our quest. I'll be back next week with another edition of Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman. Until then, stay safe, and God bless this nation. We will survive if we do it for ourselves. Remember, God helps those that help themselves.